Part 66. She Always Loves to Sleep. Author, Guy and Faye. Chapter 668. Chapter 652 Ending, 1, The Truth. Your mother and your father met at Imperial University, Mr. Lee said softly. At that time, I was imprisoned by the command to complete an experiment and could not return to the Lee family. I didn't know anything about them. When I returned, they had already reached the stage of talking about marriage. Even, your mother already had something in her belly. Your brother. Mr. Lee coughed slightly, his expression slightly unnatural. In any case, it is quite immoral to get pregnant with a girl before she is married. Zhongqing's expression became complicated and he murmured, "No wonder." Li Ju turned to look at him. What? Zhongqing, back then, the association had long suspected that the motives of the Kameng's experiment were impure, and wanted to send people to investigate its details. Your mother took the initiative to take over the task. As a result, after a while, before the task was completed, your mother hears the news. Say what? Said the scenery in the empire is nice and she is getting married. Li Ju. I would like to ask, do these two things have anything to do with each other? My expression was the same as yours at that time, Zhongqing said quietly. Similarly confused. I heard that her tone didn't sound like she was joking, so I wanted to check your father's identity to prevent her from falling into it. What if it was a trap? Who would have thought that your mother found out and almost fell out with me? Zhongqing sighed. Yawan's bad temper was exactly the same as Li Ju's. He is just an ordinary person, why should we investigate him? Zhongqing was helpless. I'm worried that he wants to get close to you. Isn't it clear to me that he and I sleep together every day on purpose? Zhongqing choked, still worried, but... President, I know my man very well. Fine. She insisted on having her own way, and there was nothing I could do about it. To be honest, your mother's move caught me off guard. I couldn't help but worry. But she has been protecting your father and not letting me investigate. I thought since she was serious, yes, I knew it well, so I let her go. Not long after, she suddenly received a message saying that she had a clue about the mission. Li Ju was surprised. Clue? Zhongqing nodded. I didn't expect it to happen so soon. I hurriedly asked her what was going on. She said that she had accidentally come into contact with a core experimenter of the Chalig and discovered that the Chalig was conducting illegal in vivo experiments in private. Suddenly, Mr. Lee coughed twice, attracting everyone's attention. That is probably me. Everyone was surprised. Zhongqing asked in astonishment, You? That's right, Mr. Lee nodded. At that time, we had long hated what the Kameng did, but our family was always under their surveillance and did not dare to act rashly. We could only make some small moves in private and suspended the experiment. We didn't see any clues, so we had to put our original plan on hold and let us go back. Not long after I returned, Ah Hong took her back to Lee's house and proposed to marry her. I learned that the two of them were pregnant before marriage. I was so angry that I almost broke the brat's legs. In the end, I could only urge them to hurry up. Hold a wedding so that An won't be gossiped about. Even so, he still felt that he had wronged Wen and gave her a lot of compensation, but she didn't care about it and insisted on not taking it, which made him feel even more that his son was nothing. He didn't understand anyway. Li Hong had been prudent and steady since he was young. Why was he so reckless this time? I originally thought that the matter was over for now, but those people were not willing to let it go. Shortly after Tingzi was born, the Shaman League notified us that we were going to start the next experiment. They actually wanted to further expand the scope of the in vivo experiment. Mr. Lee breathed heavily for a moment. How could we agree? We immediately discussed privately how to deal with it, but there was no way. The Kameng had already closely monitored us, and there was no chance to pass on the news to the outside world. If we made any changes, I was noticed by the other party, and at this moment, Aun suddenly appeared in front of me. The moment she revealed her identity, he was completely confused. He once misunderstood that her marriage to Li Hong was also for a mission, but later he learned that it was just an accident. Aun's false identity was very realistic and did not arouse the suspicion of the Cha League. With her relaying information to the association on our behalf, we quickly destroyed several important strongholds of the Cha League. The more Zhongqing listened, the more surprised he became. Why don't I know these things? As the president, shouldn't he not know this? Mr. Li, I asked Aun to conceal it for me. Similarly, I didn't mention her identity to anyone else. After all, she has an unusual relationship with our Li family. I'm worried that someone will use this to be detrimental to Ahong and the others. Hearing this, Mr. Chi next to him raised his eyebrows. I said that every time I asked you about the identity of that informant, you always hesitated. So that was the reason. Mr. Li laughed dryly. It's an extraordinary time. He was also being cautious. Qi Jinkai listened to them talking about what happened back then, with no emotion in his eyes. After all, those things were too far away from him, and he was not interested. It was only when Li Ju was involved that he had some desire to listen. He turned to look at Li Ju, who lowered his eyes and was lost in thought, not seeming to be listening seriously. But when Mr. Li stopped, she suddenly said, "Continue." Everyone was stunned and looked at her. "Li Ju, what happens after that?" Her voice was particularly cold and calm. She was clearly talking about her own affairs, but she seemed to be listening to another person's story. Zhongqing was keenly aware that her mood was not right, and pursed his lips and said, "Xiaju, you." Li Ju finally raised her eyes. Her eyes were dark, and no one knew what she was thinking. Qi Jinkai put his arm around her shoulders, asked her to lean against him, and said to Mr. Li, "Please continue talking." Mr. Li looked at them, finally sighed, and had no choice but to continue. "We thought that the matter would end like this. The Kameng's vitality was severely damaged and it would not be able to make a splash in any case. But who would have thought that they were only dormant temporarily? You were born not long after that. Your mother vaguely noticed something and came to me and told me that if an accident happened one day, I would never investigate it and continue to live like an ordinary person who didn't know anything." Li Ju's eyes moved. At that time, I felt that her tone seemed to be explaining the aftermath, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. As a result, not long after, you and your mother were kidnapped together. The moment I learned about this, I immediately remembered what your mother said to me. I set out to investigate the background of that group of kidnappers. Sure enough, there was a vague shadow of the Shalig. I was so panicked at the time that I wanted to ask the association for help, but it was too late. Those kidnappers had already attacked you. When I arrived, there was only a sea of flames left on the scene. Mr. Li closed his eyes and couldn't bear to recall the scene at that time. His voice was hard and authentic. "I thought that you had encountered something unexpected, and also thought that the Kameng might not let it go. In order to prevent your father and brother from being implicated, I had no choice but to stop. Continue to investigate this matter and destroy the special administration's files." Xiaju. Mr. Li's eyes were moist. I didn't expect you were still alive. If I had known earlier, I should have investigated." "Oh. But what's wrong with him?" "When it was confirmed that Li Ju and Wen were dead, it was the wisest thing to stop the investigation to prevent the remaining people from being implicated. He did nothing wrong." Li Ju paused and said, "Grandpa, you did the right thing, don't blame yourself. If it were her, I'm afraid she would make the same decision." Zhongqing also spoke, "Mr. Li, you don't have to blame yourself. Who would have thought that not only did Awen not die, but she also managed to escape with Xiaju? Mr. Lee suddenly raised his head. What's going on? How did they escape? Zhongqing hesitated. I'm ashamed to say that, I don't know. I just remember that one day Awen suddenly contacted me and said that she was being hunted by the Chalig and asked for support. After that, we lost contact. When I found her, she was seriously injured. I took her back to the association and rescued her for 3 days before saving her life. However, her mental domain was too severely damaged. Even if she was rescued, she would only be in a vegetative state. As for Xiaju's existence, I found out after finding her photo in her belongings. It took me several years to find Xiaju's whereabouts. By then, she had become an experimental subject of the Chalig. You all know what happened after that. At this point, we can barely piece together a complete truth. The mystery that had been bothering her for many years was finally solved, but Li Ju was not very happy. She had an indescribable feeling in her heart, which was dull and astringent, and she wanted to find someone to beat her up to vent it out. She stood up suddenly and said, I'm going to go out and take a breath. I'll accompany her. Qi Jinkai also followed. The following ending chapters will be released little by little, so don't rush. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 669. Chapter 653. Chapter 658. Ending, 2, Sudden. Qi Jinkai originally thought that according to Li Ju's temper, he should go to the training ground to vent his anger. Actually, Li Ju was thinking the same thing just now, but when he was a few steps away from the training ground, he suddenly stopped and walked in another direction. Medical Department, top floor, Intensive Care Unit. The entry and exit of people is strictly restricted here. Except for a few nursing staff, there is only the faint sound of electric current from the operation of a bunch of precision instruments. Li Ju almost didn't need to show her identification. Everyone here knew her face. However, this time, everyone looked at her with surprise because of a man who was following her step by step. Zhu Shen has never brought anyone here, let alone the opposite sex. The work in the intensive care unit is inherently isolated and boring. Normally, there is no opportunity to be exposed to the gossip of the outside world. For the first time, when such explosive news is encountered, everyone's souls of gossip are burning. The whispers around her reached Li Ju's ears. She paused and looked at the man beside her with a smile in her eyes. Q God, no one here seems to know you. Qi Jinkai's expression did not change. It's normal, I have never been to the medical department. Li Ju opened his eyes wide. She was the one who inevitably got injured several times when she went out on missions. Unfortunately, she was hospitalized here, but her third brother didn't even get injured once. Li Ju looked at him in surprise and asked, what kind of indestructible body are you? Qi Jinkai looked helpless. We have our own medical staff. Li Ju raised his eyebrows and couldn't help but feel a little emotional when he thought of the rumors in the association about God Q being mysterious and unpredictable and not fond of meeting people. No wonder, my colleagues have never met each other for such a long time. She is too lazy to show her face. Qi Jinkai doesn't like to interact with outsiders. Tisk, what a fool. It's amazing that we two can get together, Li Ju said sincerely. Qi Jinkai. What else could he say? Being silenced by Li Ju, he simply shut up and followed her silently until the person in front suddenly stopped. Qi Jinkai looked up and found that they had arrived at the observation room. Through the glass, she could clearly see a pile of medical instruments displayed inside. The dense lines were intertwined and stretched towards the person on the hospital bed. Her face was peaceful and her expression was peaceful, as if asleep. He had a vague guess, this is my mother. Qi Jinkai subconsciously stood up straight, with a look of seriousness in his eyes. He looked at the woman lying on the hospital bed again and asked, how long has she been sleeping? Li Ju lowered her eyes and pressed her forehead lightly against the glass. I don't know, she has been like this since I can remember. Even now, she still shows no sign of waking up. She is very strange to me. Li Ju used the word strange carefully. She was raised by Zhongqing. From her perspective, Zhongqing and Mia were her closest family members, but she had no idea about her mother at all. Qi Jinkai was silent for a moment and asked, "Do you blame her?" In any case, Li Ju lacked maternal love for 20 years in his past life. Li Ju chuckled, "Why blame her? For abandoning me in times of crisis." Qi Jinkai said nothing. "Even if I don't know what happened back then, I can imagine how a mother would feel that it would be safer to abandon her 1-month-old daughter than to keep her with her." Qi Jinkai looked at her silently. Her expression was natural, and she could not see any sadness, as if what she was talking about was a completely unrelated person's experience. She was so distressed to him. He sighed and stretched out his arms to hug her. "She loves you," he said. "Okay, I know." Li Ju leaned against Qi Jinkai's arms and looked at Yewan in the custody room quietly. "Now that Grandpa and the others know that Mother is not dead, they will probably be very happy. Happiness is inevitable, but more importantly, there are worries. For the sake of the safety of Li Chen and his son, both Yewan and Mr. Li concealed things about the superpowers. Now that he has been kidnapped by the Chalig, Li Chen, there must be no way to hide it, and I don't know what his reaction will be when he knows the truth." The two of them stayed with Yewan for a while. During this period, Qi Jinkai received a message and left first. Li Ju glanced at the woman with her eyes tightly closed on the bed, and turned to leave. When she went back, she happened to hear Zhongqing's suggestion to let the two old men stay in the association temporarily. Although Los was dead and the headquarters of the Chalig had been destroyed, the branches of the Chalig around the world had not yet been removed, just in case. It is safer for them to stay in the association. However, Mr. Li refused. Under Zhongqing's surprised gaze, he explained, "Due to special circumstances, Xiaju's mother and I hid the matter of superpowers from Ah Chen at the same time. Now that I have been kidnapped by the Kameng, he must have known some of the truth. In order to prevent him from doing something stupid, I have to go back and take a look. He knows his son very well. Once he learns that there is another truth about what happened back then, he will definitely investigate at all costs. For Yewan, he can overthrow the entire imperial capital." This. Zhongqing looked at Li Ju in embarrassment, seeking her opinion. According to the current situation, the members and dens of the Chalig in the imperial capital have not yet been cleaned up. It is safest for Mr. Li to stay in the association. What he didn't expect was that Li Ju actually agreed. "I will arrange for someone to you back." Mr. Li frowned, feeling that this was not necessary, but seeing Li Ju's unquestionable tone, he said nothing more and turned around to leave, planning to discuss the matter with Mr. Qi. After he left, Zhongqing gave her a disapproving look and said, "Xiaju, the imperial capital is in chaos now. What if the two old men are in danger?" In this regard, Li Ju did not explain too much, but handed him the latest information investigated by his men. "This is what I just received." Zhongqing took it doubtfully, and after seeing it clearly, his expression changed. "This is..." Li Ju sneered, "Los, this lunatic, will not forget to leave us trouble even after he dies." The experimental subjects they met at the Shamu Alliance headquarters were only a small part. Luz had privately cultivated countless experimental subjects on a large scale and placed them in various Shamu Union strongholds. He had long been prepared. If anything happened to him, unexpectedly, the branches of the Chalig in various places will release the experimental subject and let the whole world bury him with him. The special administration bureaus in various places had no time to react and were already in chaos. This is the information handed over by the first and second teams from the internal lines of each special administration bureau. I'm afraid it won't be long before the association will receive requests for help from various places. Li Ju breathed a long sigh of relief and said with a deep look in his eyes, now it seems that the imperial capital is a relatively safe place. She has ordered all the members of the second team who stayed in the imperial capital to mobilize to cooperate with the Special Administration Bureau in searching for the remnants of the Chalig, and activated the emergency plan to carry out all defense work. ACI has already gone to do emergency treatment. Old man, what are you going to do? Zhongqing's face was already extremely pale. These emergencies caught him off guard, but there was only one thing he cared about most. The Kameng secretly created so many experimental subjects, and the association was not aware of it. Li Ju sighed and said, I have said long ago that we should continue to rebel against it, and the disadvantages of the association system have long been highlighted. You have been unwilling to cut off the cancer, and now the cancer has exploded and turned into a mess. Zhongqing has been in charge of the association for many years and has made more achievements than faults. However, his temperament is too comfortable and he is unwilling to get things done. It took him many years to finally decide to take action even for the silverfish on the board of directors. In this Chalig incident, in addition to Los's own insidiousness and cunning, the association's untimely response and inadequate measures were the fatal weakness. But the matter has come to this, and it is useless to dwell on these matters. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 670. Chapter 654 ended. 3. This emergency caught the association off guard. Zhongqing recalled all the superpowers outside overnight, issued emergency orders to all special management bureaus, and activated emergency plans. Every member of the first and second teams, except those who were seriously injured and unable to participate in the operation, were all dispatched to the special administration bureaus in various places to help clean up the experimental subjects. Li Ju and Qi Jingkai took the two elders straight to the imperial capital by fighter plane. The imperial capital was paralyzed at this time. The eyes and ears that the Chalig had previously installed in the imperial capital released all the hidden experimental subjects. The originally prosperous and peaceful city instantly turned into a place of chaos. The Special Management Bureau has an insufficient number of superpowers and generally low combat effectiveness. It is unable to resist the experimental subjects that the Chalig has painstakingly cultivated for many years. Even if other ordinary police forces are added, it will not help. The flow of traffic leaving Beijing blocked all the passages, putting everyone in danger. Let us out. The crowd crowded together and kept pushing forward. The police officers maintaining order could not resist, and several of them were pulled and stepped on. The police officer in charge, despite the cold sweat on his head, tried his best to persuade everyone, calm down. Places outside the imperial capital are not safe now. This security emergency is still under control. As long as you give us a little time, we will be able to. He was interrupted before he finished speaking. What a fart! A man stretched out his arm angrily, revealing the bandaged wound. Look, everyone, look, these are all caught by those monsters. The people at the hospital told me that everything is fine. How do I know if everything is fine? I originally thought that Daijing it's the safest place, but now it seems like it's nothing. The rest of the people were driven by his emotions. In an instant, fear and anger filled everyone's hearts, and they desperately wanted to escape from this place that turned into overnight. That's right, let us get out, it's so dangerous here, and if we stay here, we'll be waiting for death. Oh, 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 please, let us get out of here. Seeing that the situation was out of control, The young police officer kept wiping cold sweat and asked the senior next to him, "Why don't we let them out?" The police officer refused with a serious expression, "No. Although the imperial capital is dangerous, the situation is still controllable. Rescue is on the way, and the situation outside is almost out of control. Letting these unarmed ordinary people leave is different from simply letting them die." "What's the difference?" The young police officer was stunned for a moment, and understood why the superiors had issued a death order to prevent anyone from leaving the imperial capital. He spat hard and said, "Damn it! Where did these monsters come from? Who knows? Just hope that rescue will arrive soon, otherwise, we really have no choice but to wait for death." Special Administration Bureau, Conference Room. All the senior executives were anxious and pacing, but there was nothing they could do. "Hurry. Go and urge the association. Ask why the rescuers haven't arrived yet." "Director, I've already called you and said it's on the way." The director of the Special Administration Bureau was so anxious that his forehead was covered with fine sweat. He kept pacing and gave orders, "Notify me, please step up your guard. The whole city is searching for experimental subjects, and reducing mass casualties is the first priority." The deputy director stood behind him, also very anxious. "Director, the order has been issued a long time ago, and everything that can be done has been done, but now there is basically no way to turn around." They were caught off guard and had no time to react. All the members of the Special Administration Bureau had been dispatched. The information that could be recovered was indeed that more than half of the casualties were casualties. If they could not wait for support, they would all die. Director Sun covered his heart and swallowed another quick-acting Juxin pill. He had never encountered such a vicious incident since he took over this position. No, since he was born. This is true. At this moment, the following people came to report. "Director. Director. Good news. Support is here." Everyone was instantly ecstatic. "Really, where is he?" "On the rooftop of our bureau." The sky was covered with clouds, and the helicopter's propellers roared as it landed steadily on the rooftop of the Special Administration Bureau. The director of the Special Administration Bureau and a group of senior officials had been waiting for them. The door of the plane opened, and Li Ju jumped out first. He was neat and tidy. He had to wear the second team's uniform jacket on his body. The black baseball cap had the second team's logo printed on it. He was imposing, cold and rusty. Everyone was stunned. Before they could react, Chi Jinkai also jumped out of the helicopter. He was dressed almost the same as Li Ju, except that the logo on the uniform was different. He stood behind Li Ju and said coldly. He glanced at the people present, and everyone felt a more compelling aura for no reason. The two of them stand together, their momentum is superimposed, and they match each other extremely well. Since the two of them were standing far away, no one could see their faces clearly. Cold sweat kept breaking out on the forehead of the director of the Special Administration Bureau. Who is this? As all the members of the first and second teams came down, the last two old men also walked out slowly. Is this Mr. Li? Mr. Chi? Everyone in the Special Administrative Bureau was shocked at this moment. Why were the two elders in the team sent by the association to support them? Director Sun squinted his eyes and looked in the direction of Li Ju thoughtfully. He carefully identified it for a few seconds and then suddenly opened his eyes wide. Master Chi, Miss Li. Everyone has seen Chi Jinkai, but they didn't expect that Li Ju was also a member of the association. Everyone was shocked. Li Ju put his hands in his pockets, walked towards him, and said calmly, "From now on, everything will be under my command." Everyone who had not yet recovered their senses was at a loss, and they were still immersed in the huge surprise of their identities. Fortunately, Director Sun, even though he had been idle for many years, relied on his own tact to understand the current situation, and responded very quickly to Li Ju's words, "Okay, okay." The conference room just now was temporarily requisitioned. Li Ju and Qi Jinkai took over the command of Daijing. They issued instructions in a tacit understanding and dispatched all the team members and weapons they brought. The most important thing is to find the source of this group of experimental subjects, otherwise even our people won't be able to last long, He Yao said while holding an apple in her mouth. Lu Qingran agreed with her point of view. That's right, but the other party has hidden it so deeply that it is difficult to dig it out at the moment. The incident happened suddenly. Even if they were all injured, they were basically fine. The mission was urgent. Except for Qi Saijin, who was still lying in the ICU, everyone else was sent out. He Yao raised her eyes and glanced at Director Sun and other senior officials who were serving them tea and water. Although the last time they came to the Special Administration Bureau was not a good one, the attitude of these people this time was particularly attentive. Well, a disaster is imminent. If you don't hug your thighs quickly, you may be dead. It's just that no one expected that Li Ju would be the famous 9 gods in the association. That is a legendary figure. What shocked them even more was that God Q and Zhu Shen were actually an unmarried couple. If it weren't for the wrong time, they would really want to hit the wall and try to see if they were dreaming. Li Ju and Qi Jinkai had no time to care about the gossip in everyone's mind. They analyzed the current situation with solemn expressions. The 5 major families are basically all under control according to the intelligence from the front. The other party did not harm them, but took them as hostages. Speaking of this, Li Ju's eyes darkened and he clenched his hands tightly. Li Chen also fell into their hands. Damn it! Qi Jinkai noticed something was wrong with Li Ju's expression, carefully took her into his arms, and comforted her. It's okay, I will save her. Li Ju pressed his eyebrows and said slightly tiredly, I know. It's just that I've experienced so much in just a few days, and I'm a little tired. The next moment, she opened her eyes and said to everyone, don't just stay here and take action. Everyone, yes. Since the association's support arrived, the situation in Daijing has gradually been brought under control, and the rescued people have been placed in the temporary rescue area. The staff of the Special Management Bureau quickly formed a search and rescue team to continue searching for survivors and eliminate experimental subjects wandering in the imperial capital. The particle cannon accurately destroyed a Chalig stronghold. Lu Qingran whistled and praised, okay, it's very accurate. He Yao put down the heavy weapon on her shoulders, her face not very pretty, even a little gloomy. Lu Qingran noticed her low pressure and asked, what's wrong? Bai Yuxiu on the side said, it should be because of An Yan, right? He Yao nodded and said depressedly, Brother An Yan and his uncle and aunt were all held hostage. I don't know what the situation is. Lu Qingran was silent for a moment. Yes, during the Kameng operation, the Li family and the Qi family were the first to be invaded, and everyone became hostages. The other party seemed to know their true identities and took the lead in attacking their families. Don't let me know which did it, or else. He Yao narrowed her eyes dangerously, raised her particle cannon and fired another shot at another Chalig stronghold. With a bang, the once bustling commercial street was reduced to rubble. Looking at her murderous look, Lu Qingran and Bai Yuxiu had no choice but to pat her shoulders to express comfort. After 1 year, the plot may not be able to catch up. It doesn't matter. If there are any contradictions, you can tell me in the comment area and I will change them immediately. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 671. Chapter 655 ended. 4. He Yao was anxious inside, her hand movements became more crisp and clear, and her face looked very ugly. She wanted to fly to Qi's house immediately to rescue Qi Anyun, but it was impossible. There are not many people coming to support this time. If she leaves her post without permission, it will increase the burden on others. Third brother, be careful. His arm was pulled hard and her body staggered. He Yao immediately recovered and shot the experimental subject behind her who was trying to sneak attack. The experimental subject fell to the ground, but he was not dead. His eyes were wide open, and he waved his arms to stand up and continue the attack. The next second, his head exploded. Ji Yuncha took back her hand, with anger in her eyes. She looked at He Yao and scolded, "You are distracted at this time, do you want to die?" He Yao suddenly froze on the spot and saw something with sharp eyes. Ignoring Ji Yuncha's anger, she came to the torn apart experimental subject and squatted down, reaching out to pick up something. That was a set of keys that had been damaged into disgrace. She has seen it before. He Yao's pupils suddenly tightened, and she stood up and said, "I think I know the origin of these experimental subjects." At the same time, in the Special Administration Bureau conference room, Director Sun and other directors were so anxious that their hair was almost bald. Where did so many experimental subjects come from? Director Sun no longer cared to look at the faces of Li Ju and Qi Jinkai at this time, and slammed the table angrily. "The team members sent out are simply unable to resist so many experimental subjects. In this case, it is impossible for our people to protect themselves. The question is, how can we save those people?" Li Ju sat silently, and Qi Jinkai beside him was also silent. Seeing that Director Sun was about to collapse, the team members behind them kindly reminded him, "Director Sun, please don't worry, our technical staff are already analyzing the experimental tissue samples have been sent back, and I believe the results will be available soon." Having said that, the longer the time goes, the more unfavorable the situation becomes. The members of the 5 major families who were held hostage by the other party were the mainstays of the capital. If anything happened to them, he would not even dare to think of the consequences. "Boss, I have a new discovery." The door to the conference room was suddenly knocked open. He Yao hurried in with a white transparent bag and said to Li Ju, "I know where those experimental subjects came from." As soon as these words came out, everyone who was already anxious stood up immediately. Director Sun asked in a trembling voice, "Where did they come from? Where did they come from?" He Yao took a deep breath and said calmly, "They are all ordinary people who were made into experimental subjects by the people of the Cha League." "What?" Everyone was shocked. Li Ju frowned slightly and said calmly, "Continue talking." He Yao continued, "And we also found that these people were ordinary people not long ago. They were made into experimental subjects for no more than half a month. It is possible to produce such a large number of experimental subjects in a short period of time. Use." She paused for a moment and then continued, "Seventh sister just took some tissue samples for testing, and sure enough, she found, nightmare." At this point, she stopped and looked at Li Ju. Li Ju was not surprised. He just looked sideways at Director Sun and said, "Director Sun, please immediately send people to search the areas where the experimental subjects were first discovered. The people behind the scenes must be hiding nearby." Although Director Sun didn't know what riddle they were playing, he still nodded and led everyone out of the conference room to make arrangements. The meeting room suddenly became quiet. He Yao's calm expression just now changed, and she looked at Li Ju in panic, her lips turned white, and her voice trembled involuntarily, Boss, why is that thing still there?" Li Ju sneered expressionlessly. She had already guessed, but now it was confirmed. Qi Jinkai frowned slightly next to him. He didn't understand what they were talking about. He was confused but didn't ask. "That guy Luz has been planning secretly for so many years, he will definitely not let us destroy everything so easily." Li Ju stood up, put his hands in his pockets, and said with a cold expression, "Besides, we didn't succeed in destroying that thing back then." "Then, what should we do now?" He Yao asked. "Of course we should save people first." A voice came from behind. Ji Yunchu walked in at some point, patted He Yao on the shoulder, stood in front of Li Ju, and said, "Everything is ready as you said." Li Ju nodded. Bai Yuxiu followed her in and said to Qi Jinkai, "Third brother, everything is ready?" Qi Jinkai nodded and looked sideways at Li Ju. His eyes collided with hers, and a tacit smile appeared in his eyes. Meanwhile, Association, ICU ward. Qi Saijin was lying quietly on the hospital bed, and Qi Mao Yi lay on his hand and fell asleep peacefully, holding his hand tightly at the same time, for fear that she would not notice if he woke up. This is what Bai Muo saw when he came in. The capital was attacked, and Li Ju led some people to go to support her, but she was left behind by Zhongqing to help handle the association's affairs. At the same time that they destroyed the Cha League, Zhongqing also dealt with all the worms on the board of directors in the association, leaving a lot of mess behind, and the remnants of the Cha League were causing trouble everywhere. The two of them worked around for a whole day and night before they could handle it. Just when she wanted to take a rest, she heard that Qi Mao Yi had been guarding Qi Saijin and refused to leave, which made her relax instantly. Qi Mao Yi was seriously injured in the Kameng, so it was fine not to receive proper treatment, but she still went through such trouble. Bai Muo originally wanted to come over and scold her, then send her to rest, but when she saw the scene in front of her, she involuntarily slowed down her steps. Qi Mao Yi didn't sleep well, her brows were furrowed, as if she was having a nightmare. Bai Muo sighed softly, picked up the coat next to her and gently covered her body. Unexpectedly, the next second, Qi Mao Yi opened her eyes immediately. Her eyes were filled with red bloodshot eyes, and there was still fear in her eyes that had not dissipated. She blinked her sour eyes twice, and after seeing the person clearly, she said in a hoarse voice, "It's you." Bai Muo's anger immediately rose, and he said angrily, "You are already like this, why are you still messing around?" Qi Mao Yi was at a loss for a moment, then lowered her eyes to look at the hands intertwined between her and Qi Saijin, and smiled bitterly, "No trouble, I'm worried about him." Bai Muo said helplessly, "Seventh sister said before she left that he was fine, but that he was mentally exhausted and needed to rest." She looked at Qi Mao Yi, who had become very haggard in just a few days, and advised, "You can rest assured and recover from your injuries. Otherwise, when fourth brother wakes up and sees you like this, it will be our fault for not taking good care of you." Qi Mao Yi shook her head and said very stubbornly, "No, I want to stay here and watch him wake up." Her tone was a bit broken. Now when she closed her eyes, her mind was filled with images of Qi Saijin blocking the gun for her. How could she rest peacefully? Bai Muo wanted to say something more, but it was known that she had always been stubborn, and it was useless no matter who tried to persuade her to do what she had decided, so she had to swallow all the words in her mouth. She placed the porridge she bought on the way here in front of Qi Mao Yi and said, "Even if you have to guard, you still have to eat something, otherwise you will fall down before the fourth brother wakes up." Qi Mao Yi remained silent, but she tore open the package of rice porridge and drank it bit by bit. "How is things going in the capital?" Qi Mao Yi asked. "The boss and God Q are here, don't worry." Qi Mao Yi's hand holding the spoon paused. Even now, she has not fully digested the identities of third uncle and Ajiu. And Qi Mao Yi's dark eyelashes trembled for a moment. During this period, some memories suddenly appeared in her mind. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfei. Chapter 672. Chapter 656 ended. 5. There are a lot of things accumulated in the association, so Bai Muo sacrificed the precious time that he finally squeezed out to come here to visit Qi Mao Yi, for fear that something would happen to this girl and he would not be able to explain it. Together with Qi Mao Yi, he stayed with Qi Saijin. He lived on the bench in the corner of the ward for a long time in the middle of the night. The next day, he was taken away by Zhongqing. Before leaving, She glanced at Chi Mao Yi and said seriously with dark circles under her eyes, "Take it easy. If something happens, I won't be able to reap the rewards. Not to mention that Aju usually protects Chi Mao Yi like an eyeball, even when Chi Saijin wakes up and learns that Chi Mao Yi has been so wasteful, he can still settle the accounts with her without caring about his teammates." Chi Mao Yi gave a vague hum, her eyes were blurred and confused, and her eyes were covered with red bloodshot that had not faded away. She obviously had not rested well. The door was closed, and silence returned to the room instantly. Chi Mao Yi's blank eyes suddenly became clear, the color on her face faded, her body trembled uncontrollably, she arched her body and spat out a mouthful of blood. The taste of blood filled her mouth, and the roaring in her head was mixed, and she couldn't help but groan. Chi Mao Yi raised her hand to wipe the blood from the corners of her lips and smiled happily. Fortunately, Baimu left. If she had been a step slower, all her secrets would have been exposed. I'm afraid she has spent her entire life's acting skills on this moment. Chi Mao Yi calmed down for a while, stood up straight, and cleaned up the mouthful of blood she had vomited, as if nothing had happened. I don't know if it was because she was stimulated by Los when she was kidnapped or something else. After returning from the Shaman League, her memory gradually began to recover, and even her powers began to awaken. Chi Mao Yi turned around and her eyes fell on Chi Saijin. He was still lying there quietly sleeping, as if he was extremely tired and wanted to make up for all the energy he had spent. She sat back down next to him and covered his hand. There was a bitterness in the corner of her eyes, and her voice sounded like a complaint, "Why aren't you awake yet? I've already remembered." Chi Saijin still had no reaction. Chi Mao Yi looked at it, her eyes suddenly blurred, and tears fell in a line. She buried her head on the hospital bed and cried out in pain. The outside world does not know what happened in the ward, and they have no time to care about it. Both the people in the association and Li Ju and others in Emperor Jing are too busy to touch the ground. Are you sure the hostages are inside? On a hilltop on the outskirts of imperial capital, Lu Qingran held up a telescope and observed the villa not far away. The area was already surrounded by their people on 3 floors inside and 3 outside. Ningfen was checking the weapons and equipment behind him, and said without raising his head when he heard this, "Don't worry, Lao San made the positioning himself, it's not wrong. He Yao's skills are among the best in the entire association." Lu Qingran put down the telescope and turned her gaze to him, watching quietly without saying a word. Maybe he didn't hear him speak, and the gaze on him was too obvious. Ningfen had no choice but to raise his head, his eyes particularly helpless. "What's wrong?" Lu Qingran looked a little aggrieved and confused, and whispered, "Why are you partnering with me?" Ningfeng's eyes were dangerous for a moment, and he loaded his pistol with a click. "What did you say? This tone, do you dislike him?" "That was not what I meant." Lu Qingran pretended to be timid for a moment, and when she saw Ningfeng's downcast expression, she said dryly, "Sister-in-law asked us to attack from the front, in case something happens to one of us later." Before he could finish his words, Ningfeng covered his mouth unceremoniously. "Shut up, you. Set the flag before taking action to get your own mentality. How did the first team have such a second-rate fool?" Lu Qingran. At this moment, Qi Jinkai's cold and emotionless voice came from the headset. "If you don't want to participate in the operation, I will remove you now." Qi Jinkai stayed in the temporary command tent and said expressionlessly. Bai Yuxiu and other team members standing behind him were listening to Lu Qingran's dirty words on the public channel. They all had black lines on their faces and felt deeply embarrassed. "Will he die if he doesn't do anything for a day?" Lu Qingran hurriedly said, "No. It's just a joke." Li Ju listened to their conversation, the corners of his lips raised unconsciously, and said jokingly, "I can't tell, when your team went on a mission, you were quiet." She searched through all the words she could think of and finally spit out 2 words, humor. Ji Yunchu laughed out loud on the spot. A group of people. They wanted to crawl over the headset and strangle Lu Qingran to death. This was the first time that the first team and the second team jointly performed a mission. It was a historic scene. They worked hard to perform positively and were looking forward to being recorded in history. Unexpectedly, the ferry to their dreams had not yet sailed. The ship's planks were removed by this cargo. It's a shame. Lu Qingran completely forgot about the existence of the communication headset. She was so embarrassed that she coughed hard and said to the people next to her, "How's it going? Can we break in?" "Not yet. The other party is very vigilant. The security around the villa is tight on the outside and tight on the inside. Our people are investigating." Ningfeng squinted his eyes and focused on the villa in the distance. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly asked, "Is there an underground wine cellar here?" The man was stunned for a moment, then nodded, "Yes, the previous owner of this villa was a winery owner. He liked to collect all kinds of famous wines and built a wine cellar underground under the villa." Lu Qingran was stunned for a moment, then turned to ask him, "How do you know there is a wine cellar here?" Ningfeng smiled at him, "Unfortunately, I was fortunate enough to be invited to a banquet here, and I heard about it." The next moment, he turned around and said to the headset, "Boss, maybe we don't need to rush in head on." From the underground, without waiting for Li Ju's reply, the technician beside him immediately rejected it. "No, the sensors show that the hostages are locked in the wine cellar. If blasting is used, the hostages may be injured to a large extent." Ningfeng glanced at him, who said it was going to explode. "Technical staff." Ningfeng chuckled lightly and said, "We are superpowers. It is normal for us to go to heaven or earth." The technician was not a person with superpowers, but was temporarily transferred from the relevant departments to assist. Hearing this, he was stunned on the spot and did not know how to answer. Finally, he laughed and said, "Yeah, I forgot about this." After listening to Ningfeng's thoughts, Li Ju turned to Qi Jinkai and asked, "What do you think?" Qi Jinkai smiled calmly at her and said, "It's up to you to decide." Everyone. In such an important occasion, where there are hostages and your family members, can you not act so relaxed that it has nothing to do with you? Li Ju also had a smile in his eyes, and said to the headset, "You decide for yourself, remember not to hurt the hostages." "Yes." Ningfeng and the others received permission and quickly moved their positions. He Yao watched their actions from behind, her face expressionless but her hands already clenched into fists. After a while, she seemed to have made a decision. She stood up and came to Li Ju and asked, "Boss, can you let me go too?" Li Ju raised his eyes to look at her and asked, "Are you sure?" Li Ju waved his hand, "Then go." He Yao looked happy and said excitedly, "Yes." Qi Jinkai on the side raised his eyebrows, looked at He Yao's eagerly leaving figure, and asked, "Aren't you worried about her acting impulsively?" Li Ju's voice was light, "She has sense, let her go." After finishing speaking, she snorted coldly, "If I hadn't wanted to lure out the person behind the scenes, I would have rushed in by myself. Why would I be sitting here?" Qi Jinkai smiled and agreed, "Yes." Among those hostages were members of the Li family and the Qi family. If it weren't for the overall situation, he and Xiaju would have burned the villa to rubble. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 673. Chapter 657 ended. 6. There was darkness all around. Qi Saijin only felt that her eyelids were heavy, and the fragmented light and shadow images in her mind kept intermingling and flickering, and everything in the outside world was suddenly unconscious, forming a completely isolated world. In a trance, a vague voice came from the distance, and it was impossible to distinguish reality from fiction. In an instant, the darkness around him quickly faded away like a tide, and all the illusions around him collapsed. Chi Saijin breathed rapidly, pink appeared on his originally pale face, his eyelashes kept trembling, and the next second, he opened his eyes suddenly. Ajin. As soon as his eyes were focused, he heard a familiar and surprising voice coming from the side. Then he felt his right hand being held tightly by someone, and the other person's excitement were transmitted along the warm palm. Chi Maoi's eyes lit up instantly, and her voice couldn't contain her excitement. "I'll call the doctor." After saying that, she turned around and ran out. Chi Saijin tried hard to open his mouth and call her out, but was too weak and fell asleep again unconsciously. When he woke up, it was already dusk outside the window, and the afterglow of the setting sun shone on him. Chi Saijin squinted his eyes involuntarily. He was the only one in the room, and Chi Maoi had gone somewhere. Chi Saijin calmed down for a while, then struggled to lift himself up and sit up. With just such a simple movement, sweat broke out on his forehead. Chi Saijin gasped twice and raised his hand to hold his forehead. The weakness after the mental exhaustion had not yet fully recovered. He struggled to dig out the previous memories from his chaotic mind, and suddenly realized that he had been asleep for a long time. At this moment, the door of the ward was pushed open, and the aroma of the food hit him first. His stomach, which had not eaten for a long time, made an unsatisfactory growl. Chi Maoi was holding a lunchbox in her hand. She was caught off guard and looked at Chi Saijin. Perhaps because she had just woken up, the other person's face was still sickly pale. His eyes looked at her gently, and his whole person was much softer. He smiled slightly and said in a low voice, "Are you back?" Chi Maoi was stunned for a moment, her eyes filled with moisture. She almost hurriedly put down the lunchbox. She rushed to the bedside, looked him up and down, and asked nervously, why did you sit up? Are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere?" Chi Saijin shook his head slightly. Chi Maoi breathed a sigh of relief, turned around, opened the lunchbox, put a bowl of white porridge in front of him, and said, "You just woke up, you can't eat anything else, drink some porridge." Chi Saijin did not refuse and directly picked up the spoon and drank. Chi Maoi sat next to him and watched quietly, both of them saying nothing. After a long time, Chi Saijin put down the spoon and asked, "What's going on now?" Chi Maoi told him everything that happened during his coma. Chi Saijin frowned, his eyes darkened, and he said coldly, "It is indeed a centipede insect, dead but not stiff. Don't worry, Ajiu and third brother are both over there, they should be fine." Chi Saijin pondered, but did not agree. Luz had always acted crazily and cautiously, and there was no guarantee that he would not have any back UPS at that time. This time the Cha League caused such a big commotion, I am afraid that it will not be easy to solve it in the imperial capital. Chi Maoi, who was on the side, saw that his face was full of contemplation, and quietly packed up the leftover lunchbox for him, and said calmly, "Even if the other party has a nightmare, it is impossible for the association to be unprepared for so many years. At least, Ajiu must have countermeasures, you don't worry too much." Chi Saijin didn't realize the meaning of her words yet. He just nodded while thinking deeply, "Well, you are right." The sound of the last word was stuck in his throat. He raised his head in astonishment and looked at Chi Maoi in shock. His voice was hard, "You? How do you know?" Chi Maoi looked at him again, showed a self-deprecating wry smile, and said, "I remembered it all. Everything." End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 674. Chapter 658 ended, 7. Chi Saijin froze suddenly, raised his eyes to look at her, his throat was a little dry. When did it happen? Not long. The two of them fell silent at the same time, and the atmosphere suddenly became stagnant. Fourth brother, I heard you're awake, it seems you're fine. Baimweo pushed open the door and walked in. He looked at Chi Saijin, who was just like a normal person on the bed, and raised his eyebrows, with a sense of relief in his tone. Being interrupted like this, Chi Saijin swallowed back the words he wanted to say out. His eyes moved to Baimweo, and then he was stunned again, and the corners of his mouth twitched sharply. Xiao Lu, you look like this. Are you planning to quit the entertainment industry? His hair is as messy as a chicken coop, and his two dark circles under his eyes are particularly eye-catching. Coupled with his pale face, which is obviously overdrawn, there is still a trace of the former top star. Baimweo. The big star was about to cry but had no tears. He gritted his teeth and complained, you still have the nerve to say it, you know that the world is about to turn upside down these days when you are in a coma. Chi Saijin nodded, Wai Wei told me. Boss, they and a team of people are all in the imperial capital now. The remaining manpower of the association is simply not enough. The president and I are going crazy these days. Speaking of this, she glared at Chi Saijin resentfully. They were extremely busy, but he lay on the hospital bed and slept peacefully for so long. Baimweo picked up the apple on the table and took a bite. He said in a vague voice, now that you're awake, don't be lazy. Come and help. Chi Saijin laughed, I know. It is enough to exploit the labor force and exploit the sick. That. Chi Maoyi suddenly spoke, and two eyes immediately looked at her. She said, actually, I can also help. Baimweo looked blank for a moment, then laughed dryly, no need, we can handle it. I can really help. Wai Wei, I understand your good intentions, but you dash. The next second, the sound stopped suddenly. Baimweo was caught off guard and choked. She stared in shock as Chi Maoyi slowly stretched out her hand with her eyes wide open. Her fingertips moved slightly, and a young green blossom bloomed from her palm and grew rapidly. Chi Saijin was also shocked. He sat up straight in an instant, not even caring about the hanging bottle in his hand. You. Then she remembered what she just said. It turns out that not only the memory was restored, but also the supernatural powers began to revive. A hint of deep meaning flashed across Chi Saijin's eyes, and his brows furrowed. Baimweo rushed up and grabbed her hand in an instant, looked at her whole body nervously, and asked with concern, when did it happen? How long has this been going on? Why didn't you tell me? Are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere? Chi Maoyi shook his head, I'm fine. However, Baimweo seemed to have not heard her words. He stared at the vine seedling in her hand blankly, as if talking to himself, how can everything be okay? Even the superpower has awakened. This is a big deal. You have to find the president. Yes, you wait, I'll go find the president. She turned around to leave, but was suddenly held back by Chi Maoyi. It's useless. Baimweo froze. Chi Maoyi suddenly raised her voice. She looked at the shocked expressions of the two people and said bitterly, I have remembered everything, so don't go, it's useless. Chi Maoyi. Chi Saijin couldn't stand her self-defeating tone, so he interrupted her directly with a serious expression, don't say such things. Who said it's useless? There must be a way. He suddenly tore off the needle on the back of his hand, leaned forward, took her hand, and said seriously, trust us, okay. Baimweo on the side froze on the spot, and the arm she held was trembling. She asked in disbelief, Wai Wei, when did you remember it? How could you remember it? Obviously. Obviously they had asked Zhongqing to delete all her memories, so how could she still remember her? There was a hint of despair in Chi Maoyi's eyes, her heart was sour, and her voice became even sadder, what else can be done? It was a nightmare without an antidote. It was an accident that I survived, and it was President Zhongqing who worked hard. He saved me and allowed me to survive for so many years. Now, do you want another person to risk his life to save me?" She collapsed completely, lowered her head and buried her face deeply in her hands, whimpering in pain. It turned out that her life had already come to an end when she was 5 years old. It turned out that for so many years, she had just lived in a dream that could be shattered at the touch of a finger. Why did her brother Mose plan the escape with Ajia back then? Why did these people do it without hesitation even though they knew that escaping would definitely lead to death? It's all because of her. She is a perfect experimental subject, a perfect fusion material, and she is the last link of the SEED project. Laurent brought together these carefully selected experimental subjects for repeated observation, and finally targeted her. He wanted to inject a high concentration of Nightmare into her body and turn her into a human virus bomb. Nightmare is a fatal virus for people with superpowers. It can be integrated into mental power and slowly penetrate, and then enter the human nervous system, causing various damages to the body. What is even more deadly is that this virus is extremely contagious. The infected person loses control of their mental power, becomes confused, and eventually dies due to supernatural powers. Back then, Roland intended to use this virus to control the association and the various alien bureaus, but in the end, he missed a move and these waste experimental subjects took advantage of it and ruined the plan. Mose had created a chaos with Li Ju and others, and wanted to take her to escape from the League, but it was too late. When they arrived, Laurent had already injected her with half of the Nightmare. In the end, in order to cover their departure, Moser stayed alone to delay Laurent, and was eventually buried in the ruins with him. After she was rescued back to the association, the council initially wanted to completely eliminate her as a hidden danger, but was stopped by Zhongqing. In order to save her, Zhongqing used his own powers to suppress the virus in her body. To this end, he had also left serious injuries that could not be healed. At that time, because of Moze's death, her mental state was very bad. Even if the virus was suppressed, she had no will to live. There was no way. At Li Ju's insistence, Zhongqing deleted all her memories. They gave her she made up an ordinary identity so that she could grow up safely and happily. At the same time, in order to avoid accidents, they had been by her side to protect her for so many years. At first, Chi Maoyi was particularly shocked when she learned the identity of Li Ju and others, and wondered why the people around her had different identities. Now that she has recovered her memory, she realizes that it turned out that their appearance next to her had been planned in advance. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfei. Chapter 675. Chapter 659 ended, 8. This truth is too cruel for Chi Maoyi. Because of this, Li Ju and others chose to hide it. Now, Chi Sijin looked at Chi Maoyi breaking down and crying, her heart clenched into a ball, and regardless of her body that had not fully recovered, Chi Sijin stepped forward and embraced her. In his arms, he reassured, "You will be fine, trust us. I could save her back then, and I can still do it now." Bimweo stood aside, crying uncontrollably. She wiped away her tears, stepped forward and hugged Chi Maoyi, comforting, "That's right, don't think that we haven't done anything in these years. The seventh sister's reputation as a ghost doctor is not as a vegetarian, she has long." The words suddenly stopped. "Why way?" Chi Maoyi pushed the two of them away violently, spitting out a large mouthful of blood, just like before. The pool of blood stung Chi Sijin's eyes, and he immediately panicked. He immediately stepped forward to support her, and said in a panicked and trembling tone, "Don't scare me." Chi Maoyi could no longer hold on and fell weakly in his arms. She looked up at him weakly and chuckled, "Don't worry, I just, cough cough cough." Before he could finish his words, he was drowned out by a violent cough. Chi Sijin's face was extremely gloomy. Without saying a word, he picked her up and rushed out. The news from the hospital quickly alarmed Zhong Cheng. He dealt with the matter at hand as quickly as possible and ran over. When he arrived, Chi Sijin and Baimwu were leaning against the wall of the corridor and waiting anxiously, especially Chi Sijin, whose eyes were scarlet and his expression was frighteningly cold. Zhong Qing walked over, glanced at the emergency room where the lights were still on, and asked in a deep voice, "How's it going?" Chi Sijin said nothing, as if he had been isolated from the outside world. Baimwu shook his head at Zhong Qing and said, "We are still rescuing her." The doctor said, "The situation is very bad." Zhong Qing frowned and said in confusion, "The nightmare has been suppressed in her body for so many years. It has never been better. There have been mistakes before, why is it so sudden this time?" Due to the danger of nightmares, Chi Mao Yi has been under the surveillance of the association over the years. They will also check her physical condition regularly, so there is no chance of any omissions. But why was the nightmare so unexpectedly resurrected? It's a supernatural ability. A hoarse voice sounded, and Chi Sijin clenched his fists, with a look of pain in his eyes. When she was in the Shalig, she came into contact with strange stones. It may be that she awakened her powers at that time. The nightmare itself relied on mental power to parasitize, the supernatural power was activated, and the nightmare resurrected at an alarming speed. Moreover, judging from this situation, if the antidote to the nightmare cannot be found, Chi Mao Yi will become a complete human virus bomb just as Luland envisioned back then. Chi Sijin closed his eyes. We were all wrong. The main target of that Los Guy's kidnapping was not the two old men at all. What he wanted from the beginning to the end was Wai Wei. What? Zonking's pupils shrank and his expression became cold. Following Chi Sijin's train of thought, if Los had known about his father's plan, it would indeed be possible for him to take action against Chi Mao Yi, but why did he have to wait so many years? Furthermore, now that Chi Mao Yi is not in his hands, why would the Kamen want to cause chaos everywhere? Is it to disrupt their sight and take the opportunity to attack Chi Mao Yi again? No, it's impossible. Zhong Qing quickly denied it. He had already pulled out all the nails in the association. Now the association was like an iron wall inside and outside. If they chose to take action again, the gains would outweigh the losses. Just when he was puzzled, the lights in the emergency room suddenly went out. A doctor in a white coat came out. Before Chi Sijin and others could speak, he said anxiously, "No, the virus in her body has evolved and we can't control it at all. Now she needs to be quarantined. President, please leave here immediately." With a loud bang, all the blood on Chi Sijin's face faded. What did you say? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 676. Chapter 660 ended. 9. The doctor did not give them a chance, cleared everyone out, and sealed and isolated the entire building. Chi Sijin stood at the door with a pale face, watching the medical staff coming in and out, clenching his fists. Zhong Qing next to him was hurriedly giving instructions through his mobile phone. He couldn't quite hear what he was saying. He should be arranging for the association personnel to evacuate as soon as possible. Yes, Chi Mao Yi is now a time bomb. The nightmare is extremely contagious. Once it breaks out and spreads, no one can bear the consequences. Chi Sijin gritted his teeth and asked hoarsely, "Xiao Lu, how is it going in the capital? Can seventh sister come back?" Baimwu had just contacted the capital and gave a wry smile, that Lu's probably has the den for manufacturing experimental subjects in the capital, and he can't control it at all. The seventh sister is analyzing the data of those experimental subjects, and he probably can't leave. Although there are a large number of experimental subjects, almost all of them are mass-produced. Ji Yunchu has been researching this aspect over the years. It is not difficult to develop a drug to solve the problem, but it will take time. Chi Mao Ei is also in an emergency here. Ji Yunchu has been studying the nightmare for her. Although he has not developed a complete antidote, he can still suppress the virus. At this time, she is in danger and Ji Yunchu is not there, which is a dead end. With the capital on one side and Chi Mao Ei on the other, how should we choose? Bimweo cursed lose hundreds of times in his heart. He really didn't stop until he died, and he had planned a huge game of chess. Chi Saijin was silent for a moment and suddenly said, "Contact seventh sister and ask her to come back immediately." Bimweo was stunned, but over there in the capital. Chi Saijin raised his eyelids, and Bimweo immediately shut his mouth. He, who had always been flirtatious and fond of joking, seemed to be a different person at this moment. His eyes were filled with a bone-gnawing chill, and it was terrifyingly cold. He sneered softly, "Aren't they just a group of experimental subjects? Since we can't develop a drug in a short time, we might as well kill them all. Since those people in the Cha League can continue to create experimental subjects, then I want to see if I kill them faster or they create them faster." Bimweo watched helplessly as he walked away with a murderous look all over his body. He couldn't help but feel a toothache. It was bad. If something happened to Weiwei, the fourth brother would take serious action. She looked back at the isolated medical department, hesitated for a moment, then raised her feet and followed. "Fourth brother, please wait, I'll go with you." In the command room, Li Ju had just given the order to take action, and the next moment he received a call from Bimweo. "What did you say?" Li Ju stood up suddenly, her pupils shrank, and her voice increased unconsciously. Chi Jinkai, who was beside him, calmed down and frowned slightly when he saw this. "Boss, that's it, fourth brother and I are on our way to the capital now." Bimweo's voice was intermittent, probably because the signal on the helicopter was not good. Li Ju pinched his eyebrows, his expression more solemn than ever before. "Okay, I'll let Lao Chi go back immediately." After saying that, she hung up the phone and said to He Yao, "Let Lao Chi return to the association immediately." He Yao was stunned for a moment by her condensed tone, but she quickly followed her words. Chi Jinkai frowned deeper and asked, "What happened?" Li Ju looked at him and said, "Chi Jinkai, we may have a tough battle to fight." Chi Jinkai was stunned for a moment, then rubbed her head in a comforting way. "It's okay, I'll stay with you." Li Ju nodded, picked up the intercom on the table and said, "Old Shi, Lu Qinggran, I will give you 5 minutes to end the operation and then return to the team immediately." Ningfeng, understood. Lu Qinggran. "No, wait a moment. 5 minutes? Have they just come in? Is the style of the second team so fast?" Lu Ershao, who had just emerged from the ground, spat out the mud in his mouth. Before he could complain, he saw that the young man beside him had already rushed out like an arrow, leaving him, and other team members in place. A few seconds later, Lu Qinggran's distressed voice came from the small space, "What are you doing standing still? Why don't you hurry up and chase me? Sorry everyone, my health has not been very good during this period. The condition has been good and bad. In addition, due to the epidemic and the start of school, all kinds of things have been piled up, so the update is really unstable." End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 677. Chapter 661 ended. 10. Before knowing Ningfeng's identity, Lu Qinggran had heard about the comments about the second team in the association. The most common comments he heard were "a bunch of lunatics and they are all freaks." At that time, he and the people in the second team, I don't know them at all. I just brushed off these remarks and didn't take them seriously. After knowing that Ning Feng was a member of the second team, he felt that those rumors were pure fart. His Feng was so good, how could he be related to a madman? It was only at this moment that Lu Qingran realized that it was so groundless. Ning Feng is really crazy when performing tasks. He was like a wolf whose seal had been released, rushing forward desperately. Lu Qingran was out of breath after chasing him, and wanted to stop him, but then remembered that this was a temporary passage with extremely low safety, and any sound that was too loud might cause a landslide. They didn't even dare to step when they ran. It was too heavy, so I could only shut my mouth angrily and follow Ning Feng resignedly. I don't know how long it took, but Ning Feng suddenly stopped. Lu Qingran followed behind him. He was about to say something, but his expression paused and his eyes flashed slightly. The two of them noticed slight movement on their left side at the same time. Ning Feng held his breath and observed for a while, then affirmed, "This is it. This is the back of the cellar. The hostages are inside." Lu Qingran thought so too. He wanted the Earth-type superpower behind him to open a passage, but when Ning Feng raised his hand, he immediately shouted out loud, "Wait. It would be bad if the people of the Kameng were alerted and the hostages were harmed. It would be difficult if any one of them lost a hair." However, it was already too late. A powerful hurricane instantly erupted in the cramped corridor. There was a loud bang, dust suddenly flew up, and everyone could not open their eyes at all. In the cellar, everyone has been locked up for several days. Except for the daily ration of water and food, they have not even seen the sky outside. I thought they were all wealthy and powerful families in the capital, but at this time they became prisoners in a miserable state. Although everyone was scared, they did not lose their minds. The other party caught them but did not kill them directly, which meant that their lives were still useful and they would not be allowed to die for the time being. It's just that, it's probably not going to be easy for people outside. MRSG opened her eyes. She had been locked up for several days, her hair was messy, and her clothes were dirty in many places, but she did not show any panic. She remained calm and calm. Looking at the entrance of the cellar, she let out a long sigh. Qi Jingyuan, who was sleeping lightly next to him, heard this sigh and quickly stood up and asked, "Mom, what's wrong?" MRSG looked at him, and then at the two people beside her, Qi Anyun and Zhao Yulan. She said in a worried tone, "I don't know how the others are doing." The capital was already in that situation when they were captured. After such a long time, they couldn't even imagine what would happen. Qi Jingyuan was silent and said comfortingly, "Don't worry, Mom, it will be fine. By the way, how is Mr. Shen?" "Still burning." Li Tingzi walked up to Li Chen with a broken porcelain bowl and handed it to him, saying, "Dad, this is some white wine I found in the back. You can drink some." When Li Chen was arrested, he was attacked by an experimental subject and was bitten on his arm. Later, the wound became infected and he was locked up here again. He had a high fever and rested weakly in the corner. The smell of alcohol spread in his nose. He opened his eyes. "Open your eyes, take a few sips." With a feeling of warmth in his throat and stomach, Li Chen felt much better and asked in a hoarse voice, "What time is it now?" Li Tingzi shook his head and said, "They should be thinking of ways to save us outside. Dad, please hold on." Before the last word support was finished, they felt the wall behind them shaking violently. Everyone panicked and ran around screaming. Li Tingzi frowned, feeling alert for no reason in his heart. Before he could think about it, he quickly led Li Chen to the side. The next second he heard a roar, and a huge hole instantly appeared where they were. What's going on? Is it an enemy?" Everyone was shocked and confused. The next moment, Ning Feng walked out of the cave, glanced at them indifferently, and then moved his eyes to Li Chen and his son. When he saw Li Chen's injured arm, his eyes darkened and he walked over. Li Tingzi looked at this young man who suddenly appeared in surprise. He had met him briefly at the last cocktail party. He remembered that this young man was Lu Qingran's dance partner. While thinking, Ning Feng was in front of him, and he asked with concern, "Master Li, are you okay?" Li Chen narrowed his eyes and looked at him, and asked hesitantly, "Are you?" "I am Ning Feng, here to save you." Li Tingzi was a little surprised. "Are you the only one?" "Of course it's impossible, Mr. Li." Lu Qingran's voice sounded from behind. He appeared in front of everyone with the remaining team members, and said with a smile, "The big troops to save you are here." Lu Qingran. Second young master Lu. Seeing him, the crowd became commotion. The Lu family's parents were also among the hostages. Seeing this, they helped each other out and walked out. Lu's father frowned and asked in a deep voice, "Qingran, what's going on?" "Dad, it's too late to explain." Lu Qingran stopped smiling and turned to the crowd directly, "Everyone, we are entrusted by the Alien Bureau to perform a rescue mission. Please don't panic and leave here in an orderly manner. We will protect everyone's safety." After speaking, he waved his hand, and the people behind him immediately stepped forward to help the people who had already lost their strength and evacuate them. Before everyone could react to his identity, they were helped out directly. They were a little confused for a while, but as long as they could be saved, nothing else was important. Speed up time, we've been discovered. The people of Kameng had already noticed the big commotion just now and were quickly approaching here. After Ning Feng handed Li Chen over to a team member, he said to Lu Qingran, "I will deal with them, and you will be responsible for evacuating the hostages." Before Lu Qingran could speak, he had already rushed out. "Ah Feng." Lu Qingran looked at his leaving figure and stamped her feet in anger. Can't he act together? Just when he was about to follow, his arm was suddenly grabbed by someone. He turned around and saw that it was MRSG. Clear. Lu Qingran took a deep breath when he saw that her figure was a little unstable, and quickly supported her. "Old madam, please tell me. I see them. They're all outside, don't worry, it'll be fine." MRSG's heart finally fell back into her stomach, and she was helped out by Qi Jingyuan and Zhao Yulan. Director Hu was so excited that the hostages were successfully rescued. Before he was overjoyed, he heard Li Ju say, "There are still 2 minutes." Director Hu, what? What 2 minutes, weren't the hostages rescued? End of this chapter.